Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the experience of beauty constructs among Dominican women in Washington Heights. This was a dissertation that was written, defended in 2015 and proposed in 2013. So I hope that this time frame helps you to contextualize a little bit about the time frame that this work occurred in. So presentation takeaways for today is we'd like to understand Dominican women's experience of beauty, body image, gender work, and socioeconomic factors that inform perspectives on normative beauty practices and the resultant self-esteem, as Anna had mentioned earlier. We hope to understand Dominican culture, transnationalism, and ethnic identity development, and also understand factors in Dominican cultural assimilation, issues of colorism, and how they impact Dominican women's ethnic identity development. Okay, so the study was taking place in Washington Heights, New York. Here's visual of that. The importance of the study is that Dominican women are a relatively new and rapidly growing immigrant group, and it's of dire importance to conduct empirical and qualitative investigations with them. The Migration Policy Institute reported that Dominican population in the US increased by this significant amount in 1990 to 1.1 million from 586,700 in 2000. And in 2010, Dominicans were estimated a total 1.6 million, with women outnumbering men. So in this study, the idea is to really look at how these populations are being shed light on in the literary canon in light of sociological and psychological values of these populous and critical members. So continued a little bit, in the US, countless Dominican women are seeking out plastic surgery in the Dominican Republic. And this is a trend that's dubbed as lipotourism. Latinas in Washington Heights, in New York, predominantly Dominican, are often recruited in hair salons to change their appearances by the option to spend a fragment of the price that they would otherwise spend on plastic surgery in the US. Also, the MSNBC and the health department reported that there's a rising infections in cases involving Latinas, and this is directly related to optional surgery that they're undertaking. In addition to that, there's more women who go through the monthly torture of putting their health at risk by placing chemicals in their hair to redefine their texture, also known as hair relaxers. Okay, so why are these practices employed? Why are these women doing these practices? So this study again sought to explore beauty norms practices among Dominican women and how they contribute to mental health, and also understand the sources and notions of beauty and the problems emerging from ideals of attractiveness. Also to explore the way that beauty is experienced within the spheres of race, culture, gender, and ethnic identity, and how concepts challenge Dominican women's self-esteem. Okay, so the Dominican Republic, and I'm going to be brief with this because it's a long presentation and I've got so much to cover, but just briefly, the Dominican Republic is an island nation located in the Greater Antilles, and this is a country that was decimated by the settlers who arrived into the Americas. Dominican Republic was the first capital in the New World. As such, it was a critical location serving as a springboard for the conquest of further settlements in the Western Hemisphere. In terms of European colonization, what I think is important here in this slide is that when the settlers arrived, the indigenous people were overworked and subjugated to a feudal system. And to the extent to which they revolted and became victims of genocide. According to one estimate, genocide and disease wiped out about 3 million of the 3.5 million Taínos, 85%. So most were exterminated. Let's see. And also the Spanish settlers were encouraged to immigrate to Hispaniola and intermarry with the Taínos, thus developing a new Spanish settlement and agricultural colony. So here's an image of some contemporary artwork from that era. City of First, Santo Domingo is headquarters for the first institutions of the Americas. Again, just briefly, Santo Domingo has the first cathedral, the first monastery, the first university, hospital, as well as the fortress, and it's the headquarters of the Spanish power in the New World. It was declared a United Nations World Heritage Site in 1990. Also, in terms of Dominican immigration, Dominicans are the largest Latino immigration group in New York City. Between 1991 and 2000, 335,251 Dominicans arrived. And the trend continued, and the peak was noticed between 2000 and 2004. If some of you remember, this was a time when the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services admitted a significant amount of Dominicans due to a national bank scandal in which 15 to 20% of the gross domestic product was depleted. So that peaked the immigration for this population group. Also, according to CUNY's Graduate Center of Latino Studies, there were 762 Dominicans in New York, and this is according to 2002. Some of this information might be outdated. Okay, so here we are. This is our annual parade on 6th Avenue. And here are some notable and noteworthy Dominicans and our presence in the US. So Dominican culture in the US. Dominicans living in the US tend to live in close-knit communities in which the native customs are maintained and differ from the dominant culture. We characteristically distinguish ourselves from our other ethnic groups by the taste of merengue, comida criolla, and particularly our accent while we speak Spanish. And this is consistent with other research that was found in in-group speech, and it can serve as a symbol of ethnic identity and social solidarity, used to remind the group about its cultural heritage, for transmitting group feelings, and for excluding members of the outgroup for internal transactions. So in essence, Dominicans are really forged an important group cohesion in terms of organizing themselves and stressing the empowerment and connectedness to the Dominican Republic. Okay, so literature review at a glance. Just really briefly, individual ethnic identity is formed by one's personal and one's group identity. And it's also established by the association that children make with role models and those that they find attractive and wish to emulate. Let's see, and to that end, studies have shown that ethnic minority children in America often express a desire to be European American. Therefore, for ethnic minorities, particularly immigrants, group identity is formed by how an individual relates to his or her own ethnic group. And we don't find this to be any different for Dominicans. Dominican ethnic identity. Research on the Dominicans have shown different results in the ways that Dominicans negotiate aspects of their ethnic identity, while 90% of Dominicans are in fact mulatto and of mixed race. Particularly Black Dominicans do not see Blackness as a central component of their ethnic identity. Rather, they describe it as a national identity, and it becomes as an orientation. Dominican ethnic identity continued. The racial concepts in the Dominican Republic are more fluid and launch more social differences than in the US. In fact, Dominican Blacks and mulattoes are predominant among Dominicans due to the importation of slaves from Africa and also interracial marriages. So as noted earlier, this racial identity with Dominicans has been a fluctuating issue, which has been resulting in the denial of our Blackness in favor of white ethnic identity. Even white Americans have noticed this trend. In 1966, there's an envoy, Summer Wells, reported that one of the most noteworthy peculiarities of Dominican people, that among all shades, there is a universal desire that the Black be obliterated by the white. So here, Sammy fades to white. We see a transgression going from December to May to November, and just the changes here. Body image and beauty constructs. In Western culture, I just want to specify here on this slide that exposing young girls to ultra-thin magazines has really lowered and impacted body satisfaction and consequently their self-esteem. And also that the internalization of sociocultural factors regarding appearance as participants compared to themselves is something that's impactful. While these findings speak to the experiences of adolescents belonging to the dominant culture, could it be possible that Dominican women also internalize different culture-specific messages about body dissatisfaction that leads to poor self-esteem? So in order to shed light about this, we'll talk a little bit more about beauty constructs now and how these have influenced women of color. And many have chosen to engage in practices that may be viewed as obsessive. For instance, seeking out a surgical rhinoplasty, commonly known as a nose job. So there is an emotional and behavioral response to the messages propagated, and these might have been potentially continued by the eugenics theory that dominated the public domain less than 70. Okay, so just briefly again here, Boyd Franklin found that the measures of beauty among African American women include skin color, hair, facial features, and body size. The reason why I'm emphasizing this particular population and utilizing African American women and the research studied around them is because I could not find anything on Dominican women that really was speaking to these issues. So as writer and educator, also Bell Hooks wrote about her history of growing up as a Black woman in a working class household. She felt judged by her outward appearance and under the tyranny of white aesthetic, saying that she felt that women had been portraying a certain image, placing beauty, which was also impacting their ability to upwardly mobilize themselves in society and based on being accepted by the white power structure. Okay, so body image is the way that someone feels and thinks about their body. In Belize, there was a study that was done about body image, about the Coca-Cola shaped body type. And this is associated with a Coca-Cola glass bottle, which resembles the infamous hourglass figure. And it was found that these women, or these young girls rather, that they were perceived within the context, they perceived their beauty and their body image within the context of globalization and westernization. So the young women in this study transmitted messages about concepts of beauty, which evaluated their own bodies. And how does this impact on physical attractiveness? So physical attractiveness is an attribute in which beauty is embodied and other individuals are most often the evaluators. These are attributes that are perceived to be whether a person is physically attractive or not. And whether they are or not indicates, is considered to be more sociable, dominant, sexually warm, mentally healthy, intelligent, and more socially skilled than unattractive people, believe it or not. So if being appraised by others who attach positive attributes conclude that beauty is an evidence of self-worth. Okay, so I'll move on again here. So we'll talk a little bit about beauty and hair. Many women of color attempt to anglicize their facial features and practice what many consider to be an act of self-hate. And this is really substantiates, again, going back to the eugenics, all dark races prefer white skin. And this is what was propagated in the 1920s and so forth. However, many have experienced that only by anglicizing can they ascend the social ladder. So it was found that hairstyles were indicative of advancement into dominant culture institutions, and that African American women, when they did braid their hair or wore their hair naturally without the use of chemical processing, they were likely not to obtain their jobs of choice. Here is an image of the Dominican Republic as a woman getting her hair done in the ideal of a saintly figure. Racialized appearance obsessions. So just continuing with it more, and the way that women can be obsessed with their appearance. Just to note here briefly that this dominant aesthetic essentially sends the message to African American women in this Essence article written by Bell Hooks, where she says that African American women will never be able to fulfill the beauty ideal valued by the mainstream American culture. And so, and this becomes into an obsession and a kind of armor where women hide behind expensive clothes, manicures, and fancy hairstyles. And also that apologize about that. Moving forward. Okay, so she addressed again how women were taught to be seen as beautiful and having this obsession with their hair. So back to Dominican women, in the article Diaspora National Identity by Torres Ayam, he speaks about how Spanish colonists gave currency to standards of beauty that corresponded to phenotypical characteristics of only a minute portion of the population. So essentially the image that these women were supposed to fulfill, Eurocentric sensibilities of the ruling elites, really had no semblance of the population. So there was really no consistency between how the women appeared and the beauty ideals that they were trying to fulfill. Here we see some women buying some beauty products at La Sirena in the Dominican Republic. In terms of self-esteem, self-esteem briefly again is something that's influenced by an individual's personal experiences, the people and relationships in their lives, as well as significant events that may have impacted the way that they think about themselves and others in general. And it takes on some different meanings. It is comparable to self-respect and self-regard. Let's see here. I'll continue here where Finney says that he describes self-esteem as the best indicator of psychological well-being. Okay. So I'll speak to you a little bit about my methodological approach. I utilized a phenomenological thematic analysis to evaluate the experience of what being a Dominican woman experiencing these different elements is like. The reason why I chose this type of methodological approach is because it remains faithful to the phenomenon. It really speaks to the individuals themselves and goes to them as treating them like experts, and who better knows about being a Dominican woman than a Dominican woman herself. So that was the rationale for this. And then in terms of participants, I aim to recruit about 8 to 14 participants. Again, this is a qualitative study. And in order to qualify for the study, participants needed to be between 18 and 35. Why do you ask this? Because according to Erickson, between the ages of 19 and 40, this is the time when, in terms of human development, humans or individuals experience intimacy versus isolation. And what this indicates is that during this stage of human development, individuals strive to be in intimate, loving relationships. And if they fail, they suffer the risk of experiencing loneliness and isolation. Therefore, in order to meet this task, one of the ways in which women attain a partner is through becoming attractive, as we had previously discussed, by using beauty as an objective of attraction. So moving forward, and how am I doing on time? I'm moving forward here. So in terms of recruitment, it seems like we're doing okay.
7 minutes, so you have some time.
Come again?
You have 7 minutes.
Fantastic, that's plenty. Thank you so much. So in terms of recruitment, these women were recruited, the participants were recruited through word of mouth at Lali Salon. And this is a home-based shop located in Washington Heights. It was selected because it's the most densely populated area with Dominican residents. And also it was the participation was generated by asking the beauty shop owner to post a letter of interest in her shop. Women were given a voucher if they so desire to receive that of $20 for their participation. And the participants were recruited into 2 groups. The first generation Dominican women who were born in the Dominican Republic and immigrated to the US, and then the second group is the second generation Dominican women who were born in the US. Let's see. In addition, women who were identified if they were able to articulate their experience and if they were minors or below the age of 18 and were members of clinical samples in terms of having any positive diagnoses or mood disorders, they would be disqualified from the study. So 3 procedures for collecting data: briefly, observations, questionnaires, and interviews. Field notes were gathered. The use of language was explored, dialogues about beauty, ethnicity, and how women present attitudinally, and noting how women speak about themselves and each other. So all these things were seen and discussed. In terms of questionnaires, there were several questionnaires that were disseminated. 2 of the questionnaires included a demographic questionnaire and the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. And these forms were given at the end of the interview as a data collection technique. And the reason why I utilize this data collection technique in terms of cultural sensitivity and best clinical practices is because the purpose of this procedure was to establish trust through rapport building and attunement or plática. Oftentimes, when people are doing research with Latino populations, they fail to remember that Latino families in therapy practice plática, which is translated into English means chatting or talking. It's a method of rapport building and breaking the ice. So these were different practices that were incorporated in terms of the demographic questionnaire that was available. It was available both in English and Spanish, so that there was easy access to be able to respond to those questions. Let's see. And then we have the Rosenberg questionnaire scale, which really was a method to assess how objectively assess how women's self-esteem was standing in consideration with all these other elements. Interview protocols. The interview was held with participants individually, and in order to provide them with an opportunity to speak at length about their experiences in private apartments. The interview typically lasted about 1.5 hours. It was semi-structured, open-ended, and digitally recorded. 10 interview questions were developed, and then everything was transcribed and destroyed. The women were given pseudonyms to continue. And here are the interview questions. How do you racially and ethnically identify? What does the ideal Dominican woman look like? How do you compare to this ideal? How do you feel about the differences and similarities between how you look and the ideal Dominican woman? How does beauty impact your life? How did you learn about beauty? When, if at all, do you feel beautiful? What does it mean to have good hair and bad hair? How would you describe your hair? And what do you look like? What do you like, rather, and don't like about yourself physically and in terms of your personality? So hopefully these questions were able to provide a more robust perspective on the experiences of these issues for these women. Upon the completion of the interview, again, as I mentioned, the audio digital recording was transcribed, files and interviews were password protected, and we continued with our data analysis. So in terms of the phenomenological data analysis, each interview was transcribed. I don't want to get too much into this here because I do want to get to the results. The transcripts were read through several times. They were identified, so encoded and divided into clusters, and the themes were reordered by subject to include these and other additional sub-themes. So, results, beauty, the research question, how do Dominican women experience beauty ideals? And this revealed themes that concern the experience of beauty as existing within a racially determined framework. That is, it was consistent with call that said Dominican women attempt to anglicize their features and engage in processes of colorism or favoring light skin over darker complexions. For instance, Yanidis reported on the risk of going to a job interview with curly hair rather than straight hairstyle. She says, I don't wear my hair curly at a job interview. I think it's an impact on my performance because I feel like I don't feel as confident. And I feel you give off that energy. And there are all these assumptions that come with how you wear your hair, that the person who's interviewing me will have unconscious assumptions because I wear my hair curly. And that's a risk I'm not willing to take if I really want to get a job. So I just blow out my hair. And I'm very aware of it because I've gotten to a point where I love my hair and I know all these complex issues that I know that I have with the hair. It gets to the point where I'm consciously aware. Am I going to wear my hair curly and go against what I'm brainwashed to think? Or am I going to blow it out? Also, in terms of results regarding colorism, Dominican women in the study valued beauty ideals that engage them in a process that become more fina, a term associated with Eurocentric beauty ideals and endorsed by 64% of participants in this study. One participant discussed her thoughts and feelings associated with this experience, which she says, so if you have naturally good hair and you have light skin, you're judged differently automatically. Tú eres bonita, tú eres fina, bonita, you're fine, pretty. There are all these positive feelings that are associated. Additionally, what was noteworthy in these themes was what is the purpose of beauty for Dominican women? Why are they doing these practices? And one of the things that was really interesting to find out was that beauty practices are done in relationship and understood in relationship to men. So this finding is also consistent with previous research conducted on Black men as having an impact on perceptions of themselves. As Gigi discussed, in terms of beauty ideals portrayed by the media of how this impacts Dominican women and men. So she observed the nature of this throughout Dominican television. Gigi reported they are mostly variety shows, news-based, but still variety shows. You have female anchors parading around, being objectified like models. They're not taken seriously. They all wear they all have 20-inch waists and 40-inch hips done from top to bottom. And by that, I mean plastic surgery, fake butts, fake boobs, fat sucked out of their entire midsection, fake hair down to their back, silky. That's where it stems from. Men see this and their ideal and what gets perpetuated onto us. It's a cycle. So, pardon the interruption here. So finally, in regards to these beauty ideals and what women have learned to endorse, it was found that women learned how to do this from their mothers. It's not from television. It's not from their friends. It's not from magazines. It's from their primary maternal figures. And mothers had an influence on their daughters' appearances. For instance, Yanidi talks about how my mom is like, tú te tienes que hacer el pelo. You have to do your hair. I was always taught that I have to do my hair for a job interview. Here we see some women getting their hair done. Again, in terms of like gender, how am I doing with time again?
So you're over, but conclude in 2 minutes. I think it will be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and my apologies for going over. There are results here in terms of Dominican gender identity, as well as cultural assimilation. So in terms of cultural assimilation, some of the things that Marianismo, how Dominican women are embodied the characteristics of the Virgin Mary as caregiving, humble, and stoic. So there were consistent findings here. Also, in terms of let's see, educational attainment. I think that this is something that was significant that came up. Many Dominican women who have immigrated to the U.S. have acquired higher levels of education. Similar to the results of the present study appeared consistent with professional roles for Dominican women. 14% of all the participants had attained some college education, and out of that 14%, 57% had master level degrees. So this is also something that's consistent with the present study that was, or the previous study by Duane, where he says that most Dominicans, or a large number of Dominicans, in 21% of them in this particular study have an occupation in business and finance, similar to what Duane had found previously. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this out with this last result here. And this is something that I think is apropos for the topic that we're discussing today, and that's results in terms of ethnic identity. Dominican women, I apologize, revealed that participants did not identify with being American or even as Dominican American, and sustained strong bonds that encompass familial, cultural, and emotional ties to the Dominican Republic. For instance, Danai said, when I'm introduced to someone, I say I'm Dominican. Even though I was born in New York, I say it in front of my mother. She says, you are not Dominican, but I am Dominican. I'm Black Dominican. Okay, so let's see. With this, I will end with body image and appearances of self-esteem. So essentially, what was found was that with the women who identified as Black Dominican actually had higher self-esteem outcomes than the women who identified as white Dominican or mixed race Dominican. And the rationale for this is the understanding that the Dominican women, and this is consistent also with African American women when compared to white American women, is that in terms of beauty ideal, the Black woman is not going to fulfill that standard. She's going to fall short 100% because there's so many inconsistencies between her appearance and that of the ideal. Whereas with a woman who identifies with being white Dominican or perhaps mixed race Dominican, still feels like there's some hope. So the acceptance level of not being able to fulfill that, in addition to other things, other factors as well that have not been explored in the study, also contribute to the self-esteem of these women. So thank you so much for your time and attention and your patience with this. I'm looking forward to questions at the end.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pérez. Our next presenter is Dr. Kimberly Simmons, Associate Professor of Anthropology and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina and Interim Director of the Institute for African American Research. She has conducted extensive research in the Dominican Republic on women's organizations, race, and cultural construction of identity, with a particular focus on African diasporic communities. She is the author of Reconstructing Racial Identity and the African Past in the Dominican Republic and co-editor of Afro-Descendants, Identity and the Struggle for the Development in the Americas. The title of her presentation is Afros, Rizos, Pajones, Natural Hair and Articulations of Dominican Blackness.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thank you. And it's great to be here. Great to see everyone, and thanks for coming today. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I found myself smiling during Lemny's presentation because there are a lot of connections here. So let's see here. All right, let's get started. Okay, again, welcome, and it's great to be here. This project is actually based on my earlier research in the Dominican Republic. And it's about, I think, you know, it always takes some time to get your arms around everything, but about 2.5 years. So I'm actually working on the book project right now. I've been presenting on the topic for a couple of years and getting my arms around things. So to begin, I like to situate myself and talk about my journey to the Dominican Republic. I first went back in 1993, so many years ago, for my master's thesis and then my doctoral work. My experience largely as an African-American woman growing up in the United States, I wondered about certain connections within the African diaspora. So when I was in graduate school, that's a term I became familiar with, the African diaspora, thinking about connections, thinking about similarities and differences, and what emerged from that, these communities of consciousness, idea of peoplehood, idea of peoplehood, who we are as a people, both in particular ways in terms of, ethnic groups, and, if we think about Black ethnic groups, and also kind of across the board, we think about the African diaspora. I began thinking about race, gender, and identity. So Blackness, mixedness, the idea of Afro, Afro-Dominican, African-American, all these different terms, and color and colorism. And for me, again, growing up, I was very familiar with, the terms that are used within the African-American community, being light skin, dark skin, good hair, bad hair, all these kinds of things. And these same terms found expression in the Dominican Republic. We see them throughout the African diaspora. So when I went, I was able to begin to look at some of these same terms, again, light skin, dark skin, but, what might have been expressed in terms of being indio claro, indio oscuro, again, the good hair, bad hair dichotomy, etc. So I saw similarities and I saw some differences there too. My professional life, I used to live and work in the Dominican Republic after my graduate work, where I worked with the study abroad program. My family was there. My oldest daughter went through second grade there, and 2 of my children were born there. My oldest daughter is back there now. We're waiting on my son-in-law's visa, and our 2 granddaughters are there. So so again, there's some ties there, some very special ties to the Dominican Republic. And again, relationships, that we've had over the years, and co-madres y co-padres and godchildren. All right. Anna, please let me know when I have 5 minutes. I have a couple of video clips. I want to make sure, I have enough time. Most of the time that I spent in the Dominican Republic, I spent in Santiago in the north here. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is based on the research in Santiago, but with some commentary about Santo Domingo with one of the salons there. So what I found myself doing, what I want to do just briefly, I'll go through these slides quickly, is talk about some of the earlier work, because this project on hair and on Dominican Blackness and on expressions of hair, all of this is tied to the earlier work. So what I did in the first book project, I thought about, again, the cultural significance of Indio, thinking about the work of Silvio Torres Sayat, thinking about how he talked about Indio, this in-between category, somewhere really representing mulatto, but at the same time, the Trujillo regime gave currency to it because it was void of any, reference to African ancestry. But again, as we all know, it functions kind of as a color category too, in talking about someone who's indio claro, indio oscuro, etc. I also looked at Carlos Andújar's work, thinking about this idea of Black amnesia. And so it was from, thinking about Black amnesia, if we can, forget, we can also remember. And so that's one of the ways I really situated the book project, kind of this idea of reconstructing, racial identity and African past, because it's actually there, and we see it. And so again, how do we think about the African past? How do we think about African ancestry? How do we think about Blackness? It's there and it's been there. But again, it's kind of, embracing these ideas. And how do we see that expressed now in terms of hair? So during the earlier work, I worked closely with Ochi Curiel in Santo Domingo with the group where she was the director of Identidad. And so this was a group, and Ochi's continuing to tell this story and building on her own work. But this was a group that formed in Santo Domingo around issues of race, gender, class, identity, thinking about how, especially women, especially in this particular sense, have been socialized to think of themselves, in the categories that are used, et cetera. So, I mean, they talked about, again, from, this idea of India Clara, this idea of mulata, this idea of being Afro-Dominican, and even negra, getting their arms around that category. They worked with different workshops. They really they got the word out in different communities about reflecting and having a period of time to reflect on how they were socialized to think of themselves and how they could really embrace Afro-Dominicanness. And so this is part of the early work. And I learned a lot, and I have a great deal of gratitude Ochi, and also to Silvio, I would say here too, because when I was participating in a conference a few years ago, Sylvia and I were on the same panel, and he was talking about Dominican Blackness, and something that he said then really stayed with me. And he said, you know, there is no correct way to be Black. And what he was basically saying, and what he elaborated on, was that a lot of times African Americans always, you know, sometimes kind of feel like we have Blackness right, you know, and that the way to be Black is to be, you know, the African American way of being Black. And he was saying you can be Black in many ways. And so Blackness is expressed in different ways throughout the African diaspora. And so that stayed with me for a very long time. So that's how I started thinking too about what's similar, what's different in terms, you know, these ideas of Blackness, global Blackness. Now getting started here thinking about the hair story and thinking again about, you know, the comparative work, thinking about Dominicans and African Americans, because there are a lot of connections here and there are a lot of similarities with the hair story. So, and Lemny was talking about this too, and I was smiling. She was talking about, you know, the example there with the job, because what happens here is this visual conformity. You know, you have your hair expresses something, it says something about you in terms of how we're socialized to think about these things. And so our hair is also a symbol, and of course, identity. So this book here talks about, you know, untangling the roots of Black hair in America. What's interesting is there have been different waves among African Americans in terms of hair, you know, expressions. You know, we went through the 60s, think of Black is beautiful. We think about the Afro, we think about braids, we think about different expressions. We think about the press and curl, roller sets. We think about different ways to do hair. It's especially the case among middle-class African Americans, upper middle-class African Americans too, that there would just be certain events, even if you wore your hair in a natural style, you would think twice about wearing your hair in a natural style for a job interview, for a wedding, for any special occasion, something like that. I mean, there are moments where, you know, you must do your hair. And so there are certain kinds of questions or comments, and typically it is somebody like a mother or an aunt or somebody who may ask you, you know, and this happened to me personally, you know, if I was, you know, going somewhere, because I've been wearing my hair naturally for many years now, since college, really, with an occasional press and curl or an occasional roller set, but for the most part, it's been natural. So there's been a question of what are you going to do with your hair? You know, it's done. You're in the Dominican Republic. Are you going to the salon, to buy a salon? Or, you know, are you going to arreglar tu pelo? You know, so you're going to fix your hair. So there are questions. People, you know, sometimes will interact with you and ask you certain things to kind of see what you're thinking about how you're presenting yourself wherever you're going. So these things are still at play and have been in the background. So thinking about kind of where we are in this shift here and thinking about the Pajone, it's interesting because in looking at the Pajone and where the idea of the Pajone comes from, we all know that the Pajone is something that generally speaking and historically speaking in the Dominican Republic is not desirable. And it's not a compliment to tell someone you have a Pajone. It hasn't been. It's shifted and it's shifting. And there's a newer association with Pajone and we're going that direction right now. But typically Pajone, it's interesting as I was doing more reading about it, has its literal meaning from the sugarcane fields and kind of like this grassy area that's kind of prickly. You know, you think about the growth and you think about how it is to touch. If you think about your hair in its natural state and its growth, that kind of thing, it's interesting that would be, you know, the kind of connotation and the image behind it. And here again, Dominican salons, you know, we know, as Lemny was talking about there too, you know, we think about the Dominican blowout, you know, your natural hair, and then the blowout there. And again, the way I talked about this in the first book project was, it was kind of like a symbolic erasure of the African presence. So hold on to that. Let's hold on to that and move forward too. So here we go with the Rizos and the Pajones and natural hair. So Carolina Contreras is known as Miss Rizos. And I know a lot of us are familiar with her. She has a great, you know, social media presence. But this, she has some quotes here from 2015. Just thinking about her experience. She's Dominican American, grew up in Boston, moved back to Santo Domingo for a period of time, and actually opened a natural hair salon. One of the first of its kind. There are natural hair salons, but I mean, she really gave she really, because of her social media presence, she was able to really shine a spotlight on what she was doing there. And so she had her own channel, her YouTube channel. She was talking about how she learned to embrace her hair, and she had different techniques, so different tutorials. And so people would ask her how she did her hair. And so she kind of used that as a starting point to launch Yo Amo Mi Pajón. So using the pajón as a way to say, let's embrace this, as something positive. So our natural hair, let's embrace it. It's part of self-love. And she talked a lot about that. Excuse me for one second here. So the idea of self-love and empowerment. And also for her, it was a way to talk about race. So she gave an interview back in 2015. And when I talked to her, when we met a couple years ago, she said the same thing. We talked about this, but it was interesting when she was asked this question, so why hair? Why did you focus on hair? And then she says, I've been an activist all my life. I've been a very conscious person about my Blackness. So for her, this is very intentional. Okay, so I definitely aproveche and use this idea of hair as a vehicle and channel to have difficult conversations about race and color in the Dominican Republic. Miss Rizos is essentially a portal or a space that celebrates Blackness and who we are as Dominicans and as Black people. And then she goes on to say, hair is the first thing that when you look at someone, te puede demarcar su diáspora, o sea, su representación de negro. So your hair is a huge statement. So that, hold on to that, because that says a lot, because this is about intent and it's about her activism. And she also had said too, that if she had said, something else about hair to kind of draw people in, that might've been something that kind of stopped the conversation. But to say Miss Rizos, it's inviting people to ask questions, and then in asking the question, and then in her answering it in that conversation about it, they come to think about African ancestry and ideas of Dominican Blackness. So she, over the years, has had several workshops, in the Dominican Republic, throughout the Caribbean, in the United States, and in Europe, actually, too, and in other places in Latin America. So she's been, before COVID, very active and involved. She's still very active on social media. Since this time, she opened, she opened a salon in New York, and this was right, everything kind of launched right before COVID, but she has a salon in New York too. We began to really see a shift, because of all the attention to natural hair. And this is something from 2012, you can see here from Listing the audio, you can see, so like here, with curls is better, a different, hairstyle, and accept your curls from an early, age, basically, and there are these pictures here. So we're beginning to see a shift. Now, this is 2012. So moving forward, so this is the second salon that Carolina opened in Santo Domingo. So I was there in 2019. I had a chance to visit the salon and talk to her more about the effort here. And this is right before she opened the new salon in New York. So I'll just go through these two. And as you can see here, the t-shirts, Yo Amo Mi Pajón. It was a wonderful experience. And let's go ahead and watch this. This was from 2017. This was an interview that Carolina gave. And so you can see here, untangling the roots of... So again, Carolina's doing fantastic work. So again, the salon is still operating there in Santo Domingo, and again, she has a salon in New York. So this is the salon Rizos Afros y Más, and it's in Santiago. They just opened a new salon 3 weeks ago, so they have a second location in Santiago. I visited there a couple different times. Shortly after I was in Santo Domingo in 2019, still that same time, I visited then, and then a little bit later. And this is Nayeli, the owner. And look at this shirt here. This is something I want. This is a children's shirt, but it's interesting to see Mi cabello es, and then we can see all these different terms. And so you can see the image. So it's a woman, again, and think about her natural hair. This is basically an afro, culture, love, perfection, perfect, pride, acceptance, rizado, so curly, culture, but again, what I keep seeing, and you're drawing the different words in here, but acceptance is one of those that you keep seeing, and that's very important in this. Also, when you enter the salon in this in the center of Santiago, when you enter the salon, this is one of the signs that you see. So again, notice the image right here. And so, llevar mi cabello afro rizado es sentirme bendecida por mi diseño original, mi cuerpo, manos, pies, y corazón. And so, I mean, again, thinking my original design, who I am, so it's embracing who I am, and it's about acceptance. And here you can see, again, just other images here, representing natural hair, representing Afro, all kinds of images of affirmation all throughout the salon. So here's the inside of this is again the first salon that they opened. So over here you can see painted on the wall, amo mi cabello natural, no hay otro igual. And then the different hair products here. This is a bench that is outside of this area right here. So Afro Power. I tried to just, it's just amazing. So anyway, Rizos Afros y Más, in terms of a collective, they do very similar work as Carolina Contreras and Miss Rizos and her team. They actually have here Cibao Rizado. They had to cancel it this year because of COVID, but they've had Cibao Rizado, which is an expo, which is a chance to come together, in terms of a community. They learn about different products and, talk about different hairstyles. Anyways, it's a collective. It's a day to kind of celebrate natural hair. Now over here, in terms of
3 more minutes.
Woo, okay. Okay, let me hurry up. Okay, they have a very active social media presence here too, as you can see here. I'll just move on quickly. Thank you so much for that, Anna. Okay, so Rizos Afros y Más. So again, thinking about how we're all socialized and thinking about, some of the what we hear in our heads as we think about going to different events. So when my daughter got married last summer, again, just thinking, okay, again, a social event, a major occasion. I went to Rizos Afros y Más and I said, I'm going to wear my hair natural. This is how I'm going to go. It's an outdoor event, and everything. So I was very aware of the occasion. I was very aware of where it was. And I also wanted my hair to kind of stay, because I know it's humidity, you're outside, etc. And so they do hair for special occasions, obviously. And then I look and I see that they included the picture on their social media site there. I might not have, what this is about, just to quickly say it, is that they do different workshops. They do hair workshops. They talk about how to treat your hair. And so I'll skip that real quick. Now, just to kind of show the shift in Santiago and around the country, you're starting to see different hair images, natural hair, different expressions of natural hair. I'll go through here. This sign was outside of La Serena 2 years ago. And again, notice her hair. So this is the point I wanted to make here. And again, on the news, these are images that we probably wouldn't have seen some years ago. This is at the Plaza Internacional in Santiago, and this was 2 years ago. And you can see Banco BH de León, and look at the images here. And this is 3 generations here. Again, I don't know that we would have seen this, some years back, but we're seeing this now. Oh gosh. Okay, so Curl Fest. So Curl Fest in New York, going to now in the States. This is a celebration of everybody. This was a celebration, everybody coming together, all hair types, all hair textures, different groups. We think about kind of global Blackness, and here we were. It was a wonderful day. I have a couple of my students here, Amber and Tiffany, and my co-madre Lily from Pucamaima. Okay, this is where I was trying to get to, and I'm going to talk quickly to get through this. Okay, so we have a celebration of hair. We have all the different hair types, and then all of a sudden we start to see these hair charts. And maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A and how we all feel about this. But the hair types now, and thinking about, if we can think about, type, whatever your type is, 2A, or the 4C. We hear a lot about 4C now. People will say, well, you need to know your hair type so you know which products to use. Okay, let's talk about that. But there are also some elements of colorism in here that we can talk about. So this is in the US. Now we're seeing this in the Dominican Republic, the hair charts. And so this is on Rizos Afros y Más's, Instagram page. Again, you see the same, the hair care, the charts, the types here, and now different products. So Afro Love is a product in the Dominican Republic. So is Curly Love. We can talk about that in the Q&A. But you can buy the products now in the States. I did buy, I guess Curly Love's now available now too, but I had bought Afro Love before. So these are all products that can be purchased now in the United States. And it's interesting to see how it's marketed, especially now thinking about how the types are. And just in conclusion, oh my goodness. Okay, so in conclusion, now just put this on the back burner. it's hard in the celebration of everything not to recognize that there is a critique and there is a little bit of there's some sentiments in the natural hair movement that that the movement has been hijacked by, quote unquote, as it says here, mixed women, in terms of kind of hair and expressions of hair. And it was really the 4 type sisters, as you see right here, who were really who need to be celebrated in this movement, because not just the curly hair, but other types of hair. So you can see what's happening there and that. And there was a whole lot of discussion about that. So I think we need to recognize that and talk about that and see what's going on. At the same time, we come back together and reorganize and celebrate the natural hair movement. So in conclusion, the natural hair movement, to me, the way I see it, is about roots and embracing African ancestry, acceptance and self-love, celebration. It's about community expression, identity, and empowerment. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Simmons. So it looks like we're somewhat tight with time, but what I would like to do is allot 15 minutes for our next presenter, and then hopefully some of you will stay for a very brief but hopefully rich Q&A and discussion. So our next presenter is Jhoanna Méndez. She's a doctoral candidate in the Spanish program at Florida State University. Her specialization ranges from Spanish Caribbean to U.S. Latinx literary production and cultural studies, with a particular interest in the Dominican Republic and Africa diaspora communities. Her work is greatly informed by gender, trauma, subaltern, and transnational studies. And the title of her presentation is Flor de Justicia, Performance and Spatial Reappropriation in Contemporary Dominican Texts.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you everyone for being here, and also Drs. Pérez and Simmons for their wonderful presentations. Anna, can you please give me a 5-minute marker before the end, just so I know what to skip? I am going to move from the phenomenological to the literary criticism. I also study hair, so it has been really great to hear both of your ponencias. Because of time, I am not going to translate. I will, my quotes will be in Spanish. So, in popular imaginaries, contestations to hegemonic power have been recorded and remembered as blood-stained affairs. Much attention is paid to slave revolts and revolutions alike, dramatic emancipatory processes that highlight the fatigue and fury of the oppressed. Nevertheless, the aim of this paper is to examine how ordinary, marginalized people speak to power and collapse and reconfigure demarcations set by the Dominican society. To do this, we turn to 2 novels, Song of the Water Saints by Nelly Rosario and Papi by Rita Indiana. In this pair of transnational Dominican works, we are presented with familial sagas that exemplify intergenerational and collective trauma, systemic racial ideology, etc. However, for the purpose of this paper, I will concentrate on the nexus of performance and spatial reappropriation. That is, the reclamation of space as a metaphor for wresting power from the status/static quo. Moreover, performance arts acts as an emancipatory tool that is a survival tactic for traumatized individuals relegated to the periphery. Notably, these acts of quotidian revolution are realized through queer, racialized subjects. In song, we have one character named La Gitana, whereas in Papi, we have a character named La Niña. And this is a nickname that I have given to her because she is a nameless child, even though she is our protagonist. So in these works, my dissertation and my thesis reworks or employs the term queer in an expansive manner to mean a person belonging to the LGBTQ plus community and a person who deviates from the established norm. that is a marginalized person. At times, given the characters, both definitions are at play. And in the case of this paper, they are both at play, as La Gitana is gay, La Niña is a lesbian, and they both diverge from the norms set by the Dominican culture. So the close reading begins with 7 pages devoted to La Gitana, and they center the protagonist visiting his stone house surrounded by poppy in a valley on the borders of town. So physically, we're already manifesting his marginality, his liminality through nature and through his approximation to the center of town. From his first mention, we are presented an Edenic scene that romanticizes his relation to space as it focuses on rocking chairs, hummingbirds, etc. But I argue that his removal from the center of the town is a form and an act of disidentification. So he does this in order to survive and to protect himself from the violence of the outside world that seeks his knowledge, but only when they, whenever it's their whim. It's not that they actually value that vision that he has as a fortune teller and palm reader. So hastily, this transforms into a description of his hair and beauty, 2 features which work to feminize him amongst others. Furthermore, he's said to smell of rose water on holy days and of lavender on regular days, wear an outmoded corset that caused him often to fill the air with husky sighing, and crosses his ankle under heavy skirts, while chewing on a sprig of parsley. So here we have intersections of not only Haitian Haitian iconography through the massacre of 1937 because of the parsley. We also have a feminization of a Black figure and gay figure in our text. Notably, he's labeled a man. His characterization firmly aligns, although his characterization firmly aligns him with feminine energy, which is important to note given that these texts are radical acts spearheaded by women or women-adjacent characters. This inverts traditional gender roles by reversing the dynamic of power to spotlight women and femininity as a power source. Despite his illiteracy, he is a character that typifies worldly knowledge and gives off the impression of having consorted with the country's great poets and leaders of the time, as he could recite long poems and famous speeches. He's an enigmatic person that embodies contradictions on every single level. He juxtaposes illiteracy to an estimable familiarity of literary and cultural texts, but also his knowledge of spiritual work. In doing so, he collapses limiting binaries that sustain homogeneous conceptions of not only what happiness, but also what fulfillment and self-empowerment are. His performance is epitomized in both how he presents himself as a transgressive soul that does not adhere to heteronormative categorization, and his palm reading and fortune telling, which literally redraws rational cartographies. Through this communicative process, he makes meaning of the texture, density, elasticity, and the lines of our protagonist's palm. And in doing so is challenged on such a level that he questions his own abilities and later seeks to get advice from a spiritual worker. These casual comments highlight his true power, subverting the notion that authority resides only in the hands of those who are not introspective and those who forcibly take it. While her hand disorients him and humbles him, it also instructs and expands his expertise because he refuses to be dizzied by the labyrinth. None of us are anything, he says. We are bigger, we are smaller. We simply choose which we want to be, as he claimed the last strands of his hair from Graciela's fingers. Through his spiritual literacy, La Gitana moves amongst physical and supernatural realms, capitalizing on a mode of vision and travel that only he has access to, and transferring between the peripheral space he's been relegated to and yet has chosen, the palm, while wearing a rosary. He personifies a contradictory multiplicity that emancipates itself through the innovation of its own faculties. That is, what he himself conducts and fashions with his own two hands. At no point in time does he allow anyone, Graciela in this case, and by consequences, Dominican patriarchal culture, characterized by her as an alien entity entering his space, to define the terms with which he engages the world. Ultimately, he uses all the tools at his disposal, his sight, his isolation, his curtain of hair, as elements that mark the nexus of his intersectional oppression, to not only survive, but furthermore to flourish, liberate himself, and enforce others' respect of his boundaries. Alternatively, La Niña's transmutability entails an engagement with a multitude of people, and yet is no less intimate than the one that Gitana has with Graciela. While there are many depictions of La Niña's abilities, there is one specifically, or two specifically, that I want to talk about. In a similar fashion to La Gitana, La Niña establishes performance as both a product of creativity as well as a tool for disidentifying strategies to ensure survival. Once again, they have creative and spiritual access to supernatural paradigms that no one else does. A faculty which is concretized by their roles as conduits or caballos that are able to transmute, to explore, mask, and protect themselves. And when I'm using the term caballo, I am using an Afro-Caribbean religious term. That means, it literally means horse, but it means you are a receptacle and a vehicle for the gods to possess you or speak through you. In a pivotal scene, Pucci and Mili, her twin cousin, escorts and henchmen navigate through a dizzying itinerary in the Dominican Republic. They have no destination.
You have 5 minutes.
Oof, okay. They have no destination in mind apart from asserting the truth of Papi's whereabouts. Mind you, Papi has been assassinated by his socios, and they are on a mission with no clear goal. While the twins are driving, she's in the back seat, en el sillón atrás soñando su misión, despertándose para recitarle otro versículo a Mili que anotaba todo en una servilletica. So this tension between evasion and confrontation comes to a head when she pronounces, "Yo veía rayitas uniéndolo todo resplandecientes. Estaba muy claro. Papi estaba en mí y yo en Papi. Yo era igualita a Papi, yo era Papi, yo soy Papi." So here we have La Niña's transference from a domain to the next and back. She's moving between the physical realm or the rational realm and this oniric, metaphysical, psychological realm. And this ability to transmute and transfer is her assertion that establishes a permanent boundarylessness that encompasses both realms, both existences. With one mere breath, she shatters circumscriptive delineations and implodes the acceptable corporeal allowances of a child or of a woman. In a similar vein to La Gitana, she reinscribes the definition of reality imposed by the authorities, the Dominican society, the socios, even religious institutions, and in the process participates in world building by formulating alternative prospects. I'm just going to skip to the conclusion. Both characters are presented as conduits, again, the term for caballo, of not easily accessible and digestible archives of knowledge that posit ontological questions. They are visionary prophets that portray Christ figures that can pass from one dimension to another, one understanding to another, in front of an unaware audience. They are untouchable, conventional figures in Dominican lore that are unpresumptuous and collapse the power held by the nation and the hegemonic discourses that legitimize it. They set them ablaze, only to illuminate in the embers a racialized queer subjectivity that refuses to be defined by exploitative centripetal forces. They prove that mientras tú vienes, yo ya he ido y vuelto dos veces. Whereas other characters have barely begun their journey, they have already personified and concretized a multitude of experiences and comprehensive power. There is wisdom and strength in unlikely personalities that might not have the age for them. As Rita Indiana sings en El Castigador, todos los corruptos van a temblar cuando me suba el castigador. Flor de justicia del trovador, a este pueblo jodido lo quieren ver con ganas. O sea, that is, Rosario and Indiana are giving the hegemonic discourse the pueblo that they want to keep in check. And in contrast to the previous presentations by Dr. Pérez and Simmons and my own prior research, these two queer racialized characters do not engage in visual alteration to align with white supremacist ideology, but rather prioritize manipulating the space around them to suit their reality, a talent that is not granted to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Méndez, and to all of the presenters. Now we would like to open the floor for questions and comments. You can feel free to post questions or comments in the chat or directly address the presenters. Anyone? Okay, if not, I do have some comments in hope to sprout discussion. I want to say that all of the projects, they're very much aligned with revisionist scholarship. I think of scholars, activists, non-progressive organizations such as MUDA, Border of Lights, MUDA, Border of Lights. We've noted the work of Gineta Candelabrio, how she rocked academia with her Black Behind the Ears project back in 2009. I pair this work with, of course, the work of Silvio Torres Ayant, Ernesto Sagaz, Blas Jimenez, Carlos Andujar, Kimberly Simmons, Milagros Rincourt. There's so many to name. In recent years, we also have scholar activists such as Julia Alvarez, Michelle Woodker, Edwin Dandicat, Eduardo Paulino, which have challenged the skewed Dominican identity paradigm and also powerfully contributed to the global denouncement of the 2013 Constitutional Court ruling that annulled the citizenship of mostly Haitian-descended people in the Dominican Republic. Likewise, we've also mentioned the work of Carolina Contreras that galvanized a transnational natural hair movement, as Dr. Simmons noted, by situating natural textured or Afro-textured hair as beautiful, elegant, manageable, and not something que se tiene que arreglar, something that has to be fixed, right, to conform to Dominican hair norms. So within this realm of revisionist scholars and or the scholarly work, I know there's often this accusation that este trabajo viene de afuera, or these intellectual paradigms are coming from outside, right? They're foreign, right? So how can, my question to the presenters is, how can we engage dissenting voices, right? And this happens also with literary production in the diaspora in particular, right? So how can we engage these dissenting voices? And will emerging anti-racism scholarship play a role, right? Because again, we can say perhaps this is, you know, again, within the field of Dominican, more conservative Dominican studies is considered trabajo or ideological framework de afuera, right? But will this emerging anti-racism scholarship play a role in dispelling racist ideologies and practices in the Dominican Republic? So any of the speakers, again, the two questions, how can we engage dissenting voices? And then what role will this anti-racism scholarship perhaps play?
I'll just chime in to say, I think we just have to just be open to hearing each other, you know, and listening. I mean, I think about the work, thinking about, again, with Ochi and Identidad and going back and thinking about, you know, just having that period of reflection where you sit down and really think about, okay, how did we learn to think about this, you know, and thinking about what Dr. Flores has, you know, talked about too in his work, and just kind of going back and look at the history. How did we learn this, and how can we unlearn this? And we're committed to at least having that conversation and being open to it. I think that'll help kind of open up that space to really be able to kind of move forward, you know, in that direction. That's one way.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Simmons. I think yesterday in one of the presentations, they mentioned that the problem with a singular story is just that then we homogenize everything. And the point of having these conversations is to indagar and like dig through and really work through our collective trauma. And that is an exercise that we should do together, respectfully, which is a problem because some people can't do that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage racist work.
Thank you for that. If I can add, I'm thinking of the role of anti-racism in scholarship. And Dr. Simmons spoke a lot about Ms. Rizos, and I'm thinking a lot about social media and the charge that has been taken on in that platform to really promote these voices and these perspectives. But what I also see in a lot of that's missing is kind of like esto de afuera, right? This kind of like academic perusing, right? And so I feel like when those worlds come together, it speaks to what Jhoanna is talking about. Only holistically and collectively can we really be, you know, from having multiple perspectives. So I feel like it's going to have a huge role, you know, in this anti-racist work as we move forward and as we grow in numbers in the U.S. and in the diaspora. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We also have to, I think, to piggyback off of that is recognize the hierarchy that is coming from assuming that the European and the US perspective are informing or wholly informing the Dominican experience. There has been so much work in DR on the ground by artists, by writers. I mean, we can go back to Salome Ureña, we can go back to the beginning of the nation. And we really have to question the agenda and the people who only see us through that lens, through an outsider's lens, and misinterpret us because of that. By the way, I mean us because I'm Dominican. Like, sorry, I should have said that from the beginning.
I agree with that. I agree with that. You know, and I think too, you know, and I think about, I mentioned before where Chiqui Vicioso talked about kind of her own kind of experiences. Again, it's through her own experience and reflection, you know, moving, and it's not just moving to the States or moving to Europe where some of this comes into question. It's, you can be in the DR and just kind of question some of this. I mean, you know, again, through the educational process or, you know, that kind of a thing. So, I mean, we see it happening. And like you said, artists, you know, different people, intellectual, different people are, you know, kind of thinking about these in a great way that really moves us forward, you know, this way of thinking.
Right. And as you have all mentioned, so much of this work is happening in the Dominican Republic and on the ground. And there is a trajectory and legacy of this more inclusive work of marginal voices, right? So we don't, you know, I didn't mean to say that it's all coming from outside. I very much, I recognize all of the actors on the ground in the Dominican Republic. I do have a couple of questions here that I do want to ask. This is for Jhoanna. Have you considered including the movie based Rita Indiana, the movie based on Rita Indiana's novel in your analysis?
I have. I follow her on social media and I'm kind of obsessed with her. But it's in production right now. So I don't know that by the time that I have to turn in the dissertation, it'll be done and I'll be able to see it. But I do include a lot of interdisciplinary cultural representation. So I don't just work on texts, on literary texts in the dissertation, and hopefully one day I'll continue the work on Papi, because it's a great novel. If anybody gets the chance to read it, it's a lovely novel.
Okay, thank you. There's also another question. Are there sub-movements to the natural hair movement in the Dominican Republic? Dr. Simmons mentioned the perception that the movement has been hijacked by mixed women. What are some of the subgroups in that movement?
I would just say, you know, to that I think the movement, the way that I see in the Dominican Republic is kind of an umbrella movement, bringing everybody together. So there's different types of natural hair. So however you wear your hair, curly, you know, braids, you know, short, you know, again, even the word kinky itself has been reappropriated, just that term itself, but just natural hair in various forms. I see that with that comment and what happened back in 2017, I believe it was a comment here in the States, but it was a recognition that it seemed like all of a sudden when we saw curly hair, the hashtag, and we can all think about that, y'all, we can think hashtag curly hair. All of a sudden we were seeing light-skinned women with long curly hair here in the US, you know, throughout the, you know, the Dominican Republic, say Brazil, and Brazil is getting a lot of it, you know, again, the hashtag curly hair. But the women, again, in terms of appearance, they are light with long curly hair. So now there are other hashtags, still, you know, the natural hair movement, again, is the umbrella. But I think that was a critique kind of how, you know, the natural hair all of a sudden became curly. And it's more than just curly, or it's curly different types. And then we see the, you know, the charts. So I can't say there's a sub movement per se, but I do think that there are voices now saying, wait a minute, what about women who are darker skinned, who don't have this hair texture? Our hair is beautiful. We should be celebrated. We want to be accepted in the workplace and in these other spaces too. So you do hear that, but I think it's alongside everything else within the broader, but we could, you know, think about that, how we're all saying it.
Wonderful. No, I also want to note that yes, I do agree that there has been a representation of the more phenol curly hair, right, within the movement. Nonetheless, you know, the movement exists, and I think that it's important to keep this in mind. Just because there is, I would say, even violence implicated in wearing natural hair, whether it's un rizo or un afro, you know, what was referred to as the pajón, right? And that even for myself, like I've been natural for many years, but when I did do the derrizado, right, it was to increase my life chances and also social economic mobility, right? So much connected to that. Gineta Candelabrio noted that 30% of women's income, Dominican women's income, is connected to investing in conforming to Dominican hair culture norms, right?
Right.
So that there is this movement is just so valuable. And yes, let's increase the visibility of the Afro textured hair women, right? And the darker skinned women, but let's not, you know, castigate the movement, right?
Exactly.
I think that was so important to state because so much of Dr. Pérez and Dr. Simmons' work surrounded the notion that the reason why we straighten our hair is internalized racism. And it comes back to what I was talking about in the paper. It's disidentification. It's a survival tactic because you can't say 50-50, but certain places will not be accessible to you because you are not palatable, you are not appropriate, you are not read as belonging. And we can talk about theoretical conceptions all day, but the reality is something very different.
And if I could add to that too, Jhoanna, what you're speaking to is attractiveness as well, you know, and beauty being associated with attractiveness, and people who are perceived as attractive already having these inherent qualities that those who are not perceived as attractive don't have, you know, and that limits, going back to what Ms. Ozuna was talking about, that limits the ability to mobilize oneself strategically, you know, in society. So these are important issues, and I'm glad that we're here to discuss them together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is another question. Is straightening of hair always a question of internalized racism? So this has been addressed, but if anyone wants to speak to that specifically, or in again.
Mm-hmm. I would say, generally speaking, across the board in the African diaspora, yes. You know, the way that we've talked about, and the way that we've been, you know, again, thinking about straightening and the reasons we straighten, you know, hair. Now, some people may say, well, you know, what about manageability? Just to have your hair managed, quote unquote, manageable. Then are you internalized? Is this, you know, where you're internalized racism? Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, that kind of thing, I think, but it's all interconnected. It's hard to separate that out. I mean, the manageability is connected to something else that's connected to something else, you know, so I think in large part, I think all of us have experienced, you know, the internalized racism part of it, because in the messaging and the socialization and what we've understood about our hair and how we present ourselves and what's beautiful, what's acceptable, what's not, you know, in terms of Afro textured hair. So.
Right.
I can also speak to one of the participants in my study. You know, she presented with the highest self-esteem, you know, than any of the other women, and she would not go natural at all. You know, she's like, this is a practical thing. You know, I don't have time, etc. That is a process that I'm not willing to kind of like go through. But however, when she was speaking about the way that she socialized her sons, and she identified as Black Dominican, she would be very emphatic on telling her sons to speak Spanish, you know, so that they would not be quote unquote mistaken for African American, right? So going back to whether this is an internalized issue, you know, is it the chicken or the egg? You know, what comes first and how is it all related? So while she might have had extremely high self-esteem, it wasn't indicative of how she was texturizing or working with her hair. So that's still to be explored.
Exactly. And I would just say too, just another thought, thank you for saying that. Lemny made me think about this. But I mean, again, so you think about kind of your hair in terms of like the natural hair movement and expressing your hair and wearing your hair in a natural style. It is about liberation. It's about freedom. It's about, there's a hashtag free the hair. That's what it's about, just, you know, and it's about empowerment and acceptance. So I think, but I think that's because we've understood kind of the reasons, you know, we've understood the historical kind of conditioning, all those kinds of things. And so it is an expression. It is, you know, a celebration. It is an act of, you know, love, etc., self-love. So I think it's all of that that's freeing, you know, and liberating.
Right. Very, very intersectional. There's no way to interweave and dissect that because everything is so enmeshed. And that's the beauty and the complication of identity.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Okay, I see a question. I don't fully understand the last part. Okay, I see there's another post. To what extent is the natural hair movement accompanied with verbalized discourse of Black, or with verbalized Black discourse of racial identity?
Well, I would say it's across the board. What I've seen throughout, of course, in the U.S. and the Dominican Republic and other places, especially, well, I can say in the Americas and even what I've seen in Europe and Africa, it is linked to that articulations of Blackness and accepting or embracing African ancestry. So it's part of that. That's the work that Miss Rizos was doing, because she said for her, having natural hair is an expression of having a Black identity, and it's her way to kind of position herself and to have conversations with people about Blackness in the Dominican Republic through hair, that letting that be the point of entry, because it's one of the first things you notice about someone. With the other women's, with the other salon too, it's the very same kind of thing. So that's part of the conversation. So it's very intentional. It's connected. So you see it. So where they're doing these things, they're also connected to other, groups throughout, the diaspora too. So with the tutorials and with the workshops and things like with the products and sharing ideas, but it's all part of, the idea that, about pride and being proud of being African descended, etc., and accepting your hair and expressing yourself in this way. So it's tied. It's definitely tied to it.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. If there are any other comments, I do have one directly related to Dr. Simmons' comment, in that I also tie it with not only a racial identity discourse, but also a dispelling of 19th century tenets of Indianismo and this idea of lo indio, and of course that Dominicans are not Black or dark in hue because of their African ancestry, but because of their indigenous ancestry, right? So it's really, it's also connected to that dispelling of lo indio. And Janeta Candelabri also know that, when it comes to Dominican hair practices, the idea is to make the hair blow in the air. So to almost like pay homage to this imaginary anacaona, right? So the hair should not be laden with grease, because then you would be performing African Dominican hair aesthetic, right? Because the idea is to become la India, la anacaona, right? So I think it's also important to tie in how this is also tied to this conception, limited and skewed conception of Dominican identity paradigm.
Definitely.
Also a delusional correlation to make, because the majority of the Tainos were decimated. So like the very likelihood that we have any semblance of Taino blood is limited. So where is that really coming from?
Right. Okay. Any other comments, questions? I have the tech team telling me I think we only have 2 more minutes, and then Zoom will disappear into the cloud. Okay, so I would like to thank all panelists and all of the participants, and of course DSA for organizing this conference. I wish you all the best as you proceed in your research projects, and of course the rest of the day. Much luck and much love to all of you, and again, just wishing everyone the best.